Okay, it's all yours, Susan.
Well, the only thing I wanted to do, I mean, I saw the agenda and I think it's a great topic for us to talk about today. But yesterday I was talking to a neighbor of mine who's also doing a lot of genealogy and doing a lot of traveling. And he just started doing these books. So I thought I would share with you. I'm looking through it, but he put together a book of the genealogy for his wife's family. Has the mother and father, and then his mother and father and their family trees, which I thought was fascinating. So anyway, the reason I bring it up is self-publishing is a real option, and it's not a hugely there's many places you can go to, but I've just been looking through this and I'm just amazed at how well this reads. I saw one from like 10 years ago. I haven't done it in a long time, and it just felt very homemade. And this is, it reads kind of like a textbook in some ways. But anyway, I've been enjoying it all morning. So I thought, well, I'll bring this and do a little show and tell. So I don't know who printed it for him, but I'm going to definitely find out, because it's a lovely idea. And they gave him as gifts to their family, which I thought was also a really wonderful way of sharing all the research he's done, and in a way that people will enjoy. So.
Well, along those lines, recently, other friends and John has been talking a lot about the AI, the chat, and all of that. I don't know how familiar. I'm barely familiar with it. See, it's a little scary, but yeah. I've seen a few things online on genealogy sites that have tried using it with mixed results. But I just wonder if you give it access to your genealogy information, could it write a book for you? Which would, I mean, you could always edit something, I suppose, but
you bring up a good. So I'm going to the regional genealogy conference in Springfield, Massachusetts, in about a month. I wonder if that'll be discussed.
If not, there's plenty of opportunities informally to sit and talk to people about it. It's on the cutting edge, and I'm never on the cutting edge. So I'm always a little behind the curve, but I just, it could be interesting, scary, but interesting. Yeah.
The problem I have with AI is that it's getting used inappropriately. Some lawyer just got his fanny kicked because he did a brief for a court case, and he used AI. And AI had, made a beautiful looking brief, except the judge happened to notice that, that case really doesn't exist. And he went and did some work, and no, it doesn't exist. And he threw the brief out. He said, if you're so lazy that you can't write your own brief, you don't deserve to be an attorney. And I've heard a lot of negative things about it.
Of course. Yeah,
it's scary.
It's like all technologies like that it develops so quickly that laws and regulations, things are always playing catch up, especially when the people who write those laws and regulations very often, as we know in our legislatures, and our old guys like me or older who don't use their own computer for emails. Somebody does it for them. So that's what's scary about it, is it gets way out ahead of things before anybody can get a handle on it. I mean, for teachers, Jay, you're a teacher. They said, book reports, things like that. They can whip those out. And, before, if somebody had sort of plagiarized something and just lifted language out, there are ways to discover that. But with AI, that's, I don't think, the case, because it's being newly created. It's not being cut and pasted from something else. So, what's an English essay ever going to mean, in the future with this kind of stuff?
What would we have of Shakespeare if he had AI? That would be a good question. But here's the other fear I have is, okay, so if you made your family history material available to AI to create a book, okay, does AI have that now stored somewhere that, it can pull out and maybe not the way we want it to be pulled out? I'm really reluctant about, uploading stuff to applications because are we thinking far enough down the road? Are we asking the question, what happens if? And all too often people don't ask that question. Take, for example, what happened down in Florida, the governor thought he really was smart, but the Mickey Mouse did him in, and they didn't bother looking so far to see what had happened. And, it's, you really got to look down the road and say, okay, is there a possibility that this could be a negative thing?
But Tad, don't you think everything has the potential to be negative? I mean, I just, I think that train's left the station long ago. And just like if you think about it, I think people were lamenting the passing of, handwriting, we beautifully handwritten notes, and we all took, I certainly remember taking a penmanship class, and they really graded you on, and now, that's sadly is kind of gone by the wayside, but there are people who keep up that skill, but it didn't end necessarily correspondence, it just changed it.
Well, that's true, but in 50 years, the letters we wrote via email are not going to be there. They'll be gone. It's so nice. I can go back into my chest and I have letters that my mother wrote to my oldest brother during World War II. And it's wonderful to read those letters and to get a reflection of my grandmother, and we won't have that to be able to do that. We won't be able to see that person behind, I lament it, and I'm an old fart,
No, I hear what you're saying, but I certainly haven't kept, in fact, I'm weeding through things right now. And I sort of thought to myself, gosh, maybe I should have held on to all those, all the correspondence I had with this relative or that one, but I didn't. And quite frankly, I don't know where I would have stored everything. If I'd held on to everything, would I, number one, would I be able to find it? Number two, where would I store it? So I'm not so sure there are many people who've held on to things beyond that immediate event.
Well, I have. I agree with Tad. I have my mother's old hope chest, and I have all the old stuff in there, letters, cards. So they're all in one place. And yeah, it's nice to go through them and read them and think back of things that happened during that time period. I mean, we're talking back in the 50s, 40s, and 60s, and it's nice to go down memory lane every once in a while.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm glad I got some support.
Yeah, thumbs up.
I agree completely. Go look at my YouTube channel. You can watch that.
Well, what they've always said is, take some of these millennials, put them in a room, hand them a key, hand them a dial style telephone, a analog clock, and notes how to get out in person, and see how long it takes them.
Yeah.
Well, they'll be having the last laugh as we're sitting in the hall, being spoon fed and wondering, where we are. Anyway, well, just to briefly touch on the subject that we talked about, and we're not going to belabor it, but I just thought, and Tad can probably speak to this, but one of the frustrations sometimes that we on the staff run into is that over time, members, don't keep their membership active, and some of that's normal, and people age out and they lose interest or they're not able. But very often, it's just because I think they think they're not getting anything for their money anymore, and we haven't been able to offer them any new insights into their lineage information. And the thing is, you never know when something's going to come in the door that will open up new areas for you. And we see that happening all the time, especially now that we're increasing DNA testing. And I've got a project here right now that as soon as Tad's available and as soon as I get it ready to go, it was a Lineage Key XP. It's in our DNA group 44. There are only 3 members in there, but there was a 12 marker test and the fellow had never signed in, and he had never provided any lineage information, but he matched the other 2. Fortunately, his name was something Parks the Third, which is wonderful when you get those, because that means there's a second and a first, and eventually, and it was an unusual enough combination of names that I could find and build out his family tree, and sure enough, he matches that, but it presented problems or issues that I think there is a misattributed line in our database where a certain generation was attached to the wrong parents, and the DNA does not match that lineage key. So that's the kind of thing that pops up, and if we can't reach somebody, if they're not an active member, or if you're active and you haven't kept your contact information up to date, if you get an email bounce or you move or something, then we have no way of reaching you, and that's a shame. There was another example of John Parke, who I hoped would be here today, the fellow that lives in Luxembourg, but he's been doing a lot of research online, especially with their group is mainly out of County Antrim, but Scotland before that, and he's looking for people, and a lot of those lines emigrated to Canada. And we had I think it's Lineage Key NS, but I'm not sure, but a book in our library by an active member. She wrote it and published it in 1989. And it looks like those lines may be connected. And I reached out to her about DNA testing and putting them in touch with each other. I haven't had a response, but the email didn't bounce. And you never know what's going on in somebody's life with their health situation or their family's health situation. But at least she was still an active member, and we were able to relay that information on. And maybe something will come of that later, or maybe it won't. But that was things like that just brought it to mind. And I just wanted to mention that even though you pay the $30 every year and nothing seems to be happening, you just never know. And we have no way of knowing a lot of times, because it's just a new member comes in with a line that connects, but they have information through their branch of the family that others don't. And or the DNA results are such that it opens up a whole other area. So Jay here today, he's an excellent researcher, and we've got to get together soon. But I've been working on it, but it's just this busy. But he had an autosomal match on Ancestry with somebody who has a Parks line that may help solve the mystery of who the father of his, is it second or third great grandfather, but his earliest known generation. And it may be. And now I've been trying to find a descendant of that Parks line for DNA testing, and so it's amazing. There have been tons of sons in later generations, and I started following them on Find a Grave, and so many of them either didn't marry. In one generation, there were like 4 sisters and a brother who never married. And the ones who didn't have any children or didn't have sons. So you're kind of going, oh my God. But I think I found one guy who out in Washington, if I can ascertain that it's the correct Thomas Parks, But if we can find, all we need is one to see if the DNA matches. But that's the kind of thing you just never know when something's going to pop up and change your entire, research strategy.
I addressed this in the last newsletter. I commented about Father Draco, who's over there in Erie, Pennsylvania. I don't have his file in front of me, but he went back to a dead end. And as I was kind of working through, matter of fact, it was as I was preparing stuff for publication in the newsletter, I came to his file and I went poking around on the internet to see what I could find. And guess what? I found somebody who had been researching that line, and they had a name of the father of his further back. And I went and checked my given name index, and by gosh, there person was with the right dates and the right wife and everything. And and now he goes back to Richard of Massachusetts, 1635. And he's been a member since 1994. He's been a continuous member, and and I let him know, and he was really elated, and right now I'm working through some files that people who are deceased and who we either have published their notice or we haven't, but I'm going through and looking at their files. And I have before me the file of Lucille Halsey, number 260. She died in 2011. Her line went back to an Ephraim Park. And so, I went in to close her file to, make, to scan things and to get everything in order. So the file is done. And I poked around for Ephraim, and guess what I ran into? Ephraim is the 6th generation from Arthur Parke of Pennsylvania. It is, it's too bad we hadn't found this sooner, but that's the nice thing now. You poke around, and there's all these years of additional stuff that's been put out there on the internet, and people, sometimes you wish you could say, okay, everyone who is got an Ephraim Parke born in 1800. Move to this corner. We're going to talk, because that's when you find all this other information. Some people have found things that others haven't.
Hey, Tad.
Or they happen to have got the other haven't. Yeah. Yes.
This gentleman, the Arthur Parke line gentleman,
Yes.
is his last name Parks that you were working with?
No. It's a woman. It's a Halsey. Her mother is a Parke.
Too bad, because we don't have any DNA representation for the Arthur Parke line.
Well, Arthur Parke line has a lot of pieces hanging out there that are genetically related to it, and maybe not always, connected, but, it's great. So, and I have, by the way, I have added yet another field to the database, and the database, the field comes out of Ireland. And so right now I've just got 2 people checked on that. But as I find those, I'm going to mark them, because we have a lot of people who hail out of Ireland, a lot of them that come out of County Antrim. And I think it'd be nice to be able to pull all those together. But again, that's going to be an ongoing project. Whenever you add a field, you can't populate it completely because there's too many to go. We got over 1,700 files, but I bet there's 150 to 200, maybe 300 files that really do have Irish ancestry. And I think it would be profitable to have those indicated. So that's something I am working on, adding another field to the database. That database is a killer. It really is. So, but there's another example. I wish that, she was still alive, but yeah. Such is life,
Well, recently, speaking of Ireland, we're trying to locate our gang in County Armagh, and the group group 34 in our DNA project has roots in Antrim. they've been very active testing, and they're planning to meet over there next year. And I may try to join them and get to Armagh at the same time. But I recently, someone, a fellow researcher, pointed out to me, it's Ireland XO. It's like reaching out, Ireland reaching out. It's a group over there of volunteers. It's a 501c3 or something equivalent, I guess, over there, but it's a nonprofit. And they will put you in touch with people in your home county or area who can give you information, will help you. If you go to visit, they will meet you and take you around and that sort of things. I had no idea that existed. And it was just like, oh, somebody actually created the very thing that I would want if I were going over there. Because you go over and then you're standing there. What do you do? Where do you go? Who do you know? And it sounds like a wonderful group for that. Another thing that popped up this week, and I'm always behind the curve, and a lot of you may be very familiar with this. I belonged to MyHeritage for some time, and it wasn't until the membership renewed and I saw how much money I'm paying, I thought, I should spend a little time here and use this. But I stumbled on, I never really used or accessed their family trees in the search function. There are tons of family trees over there, and you can, I just, as an experiment, plugged in Parks and Armagh. And there are all of these trees that had links back to County Armagh. I did the same thing with Antrim. I haven't had time to follow up with any of that, but that's, and Gary and I were talking before you all got on. That would be a wonderful volunteer project for our members. If anybody is willing to spend some time and sort of take a county and focus on that and pull out what information you can on parks lines from that area, compile it, and then we'll see what we've got in our database and what's new, and maybe make contact with people and more DNA testing. It's just the possibilities, I think, are amazing.
Our group 30 also, we believe, has roots in Antrim County.
It's like counties here in the US. I mean, just because it's a parks from, say, County Armagh, we don't know that they're all genetically related. So far, the only ones we've tested, I think, have been, but I'm sure there are others that aren't. And when you think about the distances from Armagh to Antrim, it's the same as being, the next county over in the US. And so there's bound to be, movement back and forth and spillage or whatever. So
it's just on the other side of Belfast, isn't it, Ken?
Yeah, just outside of Belfast. They border each other, but the same in the southern counties. Now there aren't as many parks lines down there, but they're there. Carrie can attest to that, I think. It just seemed like when you do the census information, it's very heavily weighted toward Northern Ireland because of the Ulster plantation. And a lot of those lines were either Scots or North England, people who came over. They weren't native Irish. But and now I'm so excited about that and the possibilities with Ireland. I feel like we're sort of neglecting the English Irish, or the English parks. The society was founded on Robert Parks, who came from actually the same area, Cartmel, up near where I have a distant park connection, and the Richard and others that came from other parts of England. But Ireland is just ripe for tons of research. And I've mentioned if we can eventually get more information of all the different groups that have Irish roots in our DNA project and get some good DNA representation. We already have some, but I have a friend, Dr. Morris Gleason, who is Irish. He's from Dublin, but he lives in London now. But his genetic, he's got tons of videos out on Facebook, and his thing is DNA genealogy and specifically geared to mapping the genealogy of Ireland. And if we could get our sort of ducks in a row enough to present what information we have, I'd love to have him join a Zoom meeting sometime.
What's his name again?
Morris, it's Maurice, but they pronounce it Morris. Maurice Gleason, Gleeson. Dr. Morris Gleason. We're fellow martini drinkers. I've met him at a couple of conferences and things. And he's the one, I was giving a presentation in Toronto on Y-DNA surname projects, a beginner's class, and he was doing one on autosomal testing, which I had taken an autosomal test a couple of years before that and didn't understand it and never really used it. And I went to his session and got all jazzed up, went up to my room at lunchtime and started getting all kinds of results and things, and became a believer. And so, we became friends. He's a physician. That's the doctor part. He doesn't practice medicine anymore. And he was an actor briefly for a while. So we had lots to talk about over martinis. But he would be a great, and I think he would have a great interest in seeing how a surname is represented in different parts of Ireland, and what happened to it once it came here. And that's where the Parke Society's database is so valuable, because once they're here, we can track them, migrated all over the country.
That would be really interesting if and when we can get him to come and come and speak. That would be great.
Well, I think we have to do our homework first, but I'm sure he would if we can find a compatible time. So yeah.
I was reading, because of Kent, your reference in the YouTube, I was reading Born Fighting. I'm like halfway through it. And every page I turn is like, oh my God. It explains like so much of that flow that you're talking about, why so many people came from Ireland, but in Scotland and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
If anybody has not read the book and your name or a name that is Parks, it's worth reading. It really is. It's called Born Fighting. And James Webb wrote it, I think.
Yeah.
It was, right?
Yeah. He was briefly, I think, a one-term senator from Virginia some years back, and briefly, even more briefly, ran for president, I think maybe against Hillary Clinton, that year when she was running, and dropped out. But he had been an assistant secretary of the Navy. He was in the Navy, he was in the Marines, worked in the government, assistant secretary of this, that. I mean, he really has some credentials, but it's an excellent book researching the history of the Scots, and then the Scots-Irish, and then Scots-Irish in America. And his conceit, the Born Fighting part, is because of the history of the Scots, always fighting in the clans wars and with the English. Their culture was, pugnacious and fighting for, their survival. And it translated into this country. As they came into they were imported by the Quakers into Pennsylvania. I think we talked about that, because the Quakers were pacifists and they wanted somebody out on the border between them and the Native Americans who would, resist. But then they started migrating down, especially down through the Shenandoah Valley into the South, and populated that and such. And he says, and it rightly so, that's one of the reasons Tennessee is called the volunteer state, because over the years in different wars, they have supplied more volunteers than any other area. I can't speak with too much pride about Tennessee these days, state of my birth. I'm not very proud of them this week, but we won't go there. But it's a good book. It's a very good book.
Yeah.
Anybody else got any thoughts on anything? I mean, it's just kind of an open-ended forum. Catherine?
I do have one to add to your statement earlier regarding genealogy businesses when you go over to Europe that can help hook you up and take you around. I had found one in Cornwall. My mother's namesake is out of Cornwall, and they're called Cornish Cousins. And apparently they're quite renowned, and they'll take you around to the burial sites and stuff like that. So I might contact them next month because I was considering going to the Clifford Association annual meeting in Devon. So I might go down there. So if I end up looking them up, I'll let you guys know how it went.
No,
That'd be great.
definitely. I'd love to get to that part of England. We watch Gardener's World on TV all the time, Monty Don. And I think the last one we watched last night, they visited a garden in Devon.
Very nice.
It always amazes me that how mild the climate is there compared to us, because I guess they've got the trade wind, or not what do you call the
I don't know if it's a current or
Current,
I know they do have
current,
palm trees down there.
Yeah,
It's strange. Yeah.
the only time I've been to Ireland, we went across from Dublin to the Dingle Peninsula on the west coast, lower west coast, and there were palm trees. And I said, what?
I know. It's strange, but it does whip up cold there. I've seen it very
Oh,
cold
yeah.
there at
Yeah.
times in the winter. Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Yeah, it's a-
what they consider winter weather in terms of gardening things is just really, you're calling that winter? Yeah.
I'm a little spoiled too, being in Florida, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, they luck out as far as freezes, not as much. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah.
But that sounds like a great group, and I'm sure there must be. I should probably start looking around to see what's available in other parts, Scotland or in England. I have a Parks cousin. We have a Parks cousin who lives in England. She's the one whose grandfather was born out of wedlock as a Parks in County Armagh, and that's what put us all onto County Armagh. But she's very active in her local genealogy society there, and she probably knows of some groups like that, around her area or other parts of England that would sort of be guides or offer some kind of hospitality or help when you go over there.
Very handy for logistics. Yeah, very handy.
Well, I know, across the river here in Pennsylvania, the Wayne County genealogy group in Honesdale, they would do that sort of thing. I mean, if somebody stops into the local genealogy place there, they've got their own building and a library and things, and a museum, they'll be happy to, help people and take them around or give them, instructions on how to find a cemetery where their folks may be or something. And I'm sure there are a lot of places like that.
Philadelphia has a great historical society, but I don't know that they will volunteers that are I mean, the library, I think you can access it on certain dates at certain times, but it's not as friendly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more typical with big cities like New York City.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't really remember how long it's been since I've actually made a road trip to do genealogy, though. And it's not that there isn't still something out there to be gained by that, but it's just we've gotten maybe either spoiled or lazy by accessing so much online. But at a certain point, there's something to be said by, going there and being the actual area and seeing things and sort of walking in your ancestors' footsteps, if nothing else, even if you don't, uncover any great secrets.
Well,
I keep a running list of places I want to go, as I'm doing research and places, and just it is something I access. It maybe not an intentional trip, but if I'm going someplace, I'd sort of look at the list and say, can we do it? Is there anything close by? Am I like, we were going through New York for something and we kind of hit a gold mine of places that we could stop and visit. So it's a little tedious sometimes to constantly be kind of updating the list, but it was worth it. It is worth it.
there's another thing too. There's that sort of mystical connection. I tracked down the grave of, I think he would have been a great grandfather in Sand Lake, New York. And, as I stood there touching his gravestone, I realized that I was touching the same gravestone that his wife had been touching, and so I had this connection, which was really kind of like, wow, over the ages, over the space and time, I'm connecting here, and I hope the next time I get back east, I go back at least once a year, I'm going to go and see if I can find the property where he had lived in that, in that whole area, because that the Parks clan was in that piece of area for at least 50, 60 years. So I should be able to find some properties and, at least know where things were. But there's that connection to the past, and that's another thing that's going to disappear. As we go forward, lots of people, cremation is more, happening more and more. And sometimes those ashes aren't necessarily getting put someplace. One of the major cemeteries here in town, they have this kind of pit-like thing that you can dump the ashes in, and they put a plate on the side of the the enclosure that gives your name and dates. And I thought, okay, that's nice, but it's
Mhm.
and there are a lot of times where gosh knows where those ashes end up, and or there's no record of it. I just had a woman contact me. One of my very best friends died 30 years ago. I had his ashes here in the house actually for about 20. And I finally, when my brother and sister-in-law were coming out and they were going to stay in my bedroom, and I thought, probably I should move these ashes. I don't think they would be comfortable with this. And so I had the ashes put at the cathedral church. And just a couple months ago, a niece of this friend got a hold of me, and she was curious. She said, we have no record. What happened to him? Was he buried? Was he cremated? And I said, yes, I tell you where the ashes are. They're at the cathedral church. And she came the next Sunday, and I showed her where his remains were in the columbarium. And she was just so happy, but that's going to become more and more difficult. Family cemeteries and that are going to be less and less used.
Well,
Ted,
as-
it reminds me of, sorry, Ken, the graves in Salzburg. We were kind of going through and we were looking at a church graveyard, and we noticed a bunch of gravestones up against the side of the church. And they told us that graves are rented. You rent them for a period of time, and then if your family doesn't renew the rental, they
yeah, I know
remove the.
that's the custom I know in Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as a genealogist, I think to me, the present day, we have so many ways of recording a person's passing and having it noted in documents and things. Whereas in the old days, before death certificates and before all of that, the tombstone was really the only way you had of marking that and noting it and referencing it. So, I don't necessarily lament the movement towards cremation. The fact that the person is actually in that plot of ground doesn't mean as much to me as their information, where their remains are, or whether it's ashes that got scattered in on a lake or whatever. For me, that doesn't mean that much, but that's what you're losing by that, because there's no physical place you can go to and see their information, but it's there now in other forms. Well, Jay, I was going to ask you, your family has a long history of doing reunions and things, doesn't it?
And I was just going to come off mic and say that, we're having another one in July. We had one in New Orleans last summer, but it was so expensive that people didn't come. So they're doing like a reboot. And I was going to say, we have a family church that when I take my daughters there, they will be the 6th generation.
Wow.
Parks that will go to our family church. And then like kind of piggybacking on what everyone has said, we have a plot in the back of the church. It used to be in the front, but now we're in the back because they moved the church forward. But I can find my great grandfather, Ellis Parks. He's the first Parks that we know of, and we're trying to find who his father was. But I can see his headstone. But then other family members were cremated as well. So my uncle was kind of saying, well, this person was his ashes was buried across the feet, and this person's ashes was laid next to. So we do have some headstones with my great uncle, my grandfather, my great great grandfather. But my great grandfather, we don't have his because he was cremated, but his ashes were spread out there. So, but like someone else has said, that when you go there and you can touch and you can stand and you can see and you can feel, that presence of this is where your family comes from. I can only go back to this. I think he passed away in 1826, the first Ellis Parks in my family. But we can go there and we can look, and so then you just kind of go down the line. And that's where that's like our home base. So that's where we go back to be buried. So no matter where you are from, if you stay in Michigan, California, Chicago, Texas, if that's your wish, then you just be flown back home. And then that's our home. That's where we are buried at. But yeah. So
where's the reunion in July happening?
It is going to be in, I believe, Jackson, Mississippi. They were going to do Biloxi. But people said, no, let's just do home. But we normally rotate every, I think it's 2 or 3 years. It used to be 4, but as people got older, that was a long time. So we rotate a host. Somebody will host. So did New Orleans. I think the next one is supposed to be, well, then we did this one like impromptu one in Mississippi, but then I think the next one is in Florida and then Texas, and then it's coming to Michigan, and we're going to so because of COVID, it threw things off, but we kind of lined it up for like the next 12 years before COVID, pre-COVID.
Well, I got a bit of traveling this summer planned. So in June, I'm doing a reunion of Kent State theater and music people that I'm organizing. But July, if I could swing it, if you'd let me in, I'd love
to. Most definitely. Most definitely.
Yeah.
And we do like, so Friday nights was like just a gathering where you get to, the youngsters get to kind of perform and things like that. And then we have a formal dinner on Saturday night. And then Sunday, we usually kind of like get up and go to church and then have like a picnic. And then everybody disperses and, go back to their ways. But yeah.
Well, keep me posted as to, the details. And
okay.
If I feel like
Definitely
getting in the car and driving in July, we'll say.
And that's what we're trying to figure out. My girls are spoiled. They like to fly. And I'm like, well, let's drive. And they're like, my wife and my daughters are like, because I think it's like maybe 16 hours for us, something like that.
Yeah.
And then they're spoiled. They want to fly. So
I'm the same way. Anything over like 5 hours, it's like, oh.
Yeah, I get there. I'm so many there. Are we there yet? I'm like, please, no more.
And I'm the opposite. If I can drive there, I'll drive rather than fly.
I'm
Even if it takes a couple of days.
I'm the same. In my career, I've flown a lot, but now flying is no longer a joy, no longer fun. And I just as soon, drive. And that way I got my vehicle. I could decide where I'm going to go and how I'm going to go. And, it's so fine. If it takes me 2 days to get back east, fine. I find some place to track up for the night and I'm happy, By the way, I'm going to have I'm going to have Ken send me your email address because I'm going to send you papers. Okay. I got to get you in. Period.
Yes. Yeah. I heard someone say about the annual membership, and I got a few dollars I can do that. So that's not a problem. And plus anything else that you have. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
When you're talking about cremains and things like that, what we've done is we put a memorial stone, and usually the people whose remains are in the plot are on that memorial stone, which I think helps sort of identify that they're there.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Because my dad and uncle were naming people, and they were like, well, this person's at this foot, this person is here. And even my grandmother, when she passed, they cremated her, and they just poured her ashes on top of my grandfather's grave. And then my aunt, they took part of hers and put it in the cemetery with everybody else. And I think either they put it on the dirt road that she grew up on, or they took her to the Yazoo River. And so if she had like 2 places that she wanted, so. And
Yeah,
the thing
that-
is,
yeah,
my
aunt-
dad threw the ashes and the wind blew and got him. And she was always a prankster. And so he was like, she get me that last time. She get me that last time.
You're lucky to do things like that, because here in Wisconsin, they're very fussy about that, they,
You have to do it, you have to do it covertly.
oh, yeah. Make sure, it's doing it like at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you've seen the cops drive by and go the other direction, and then you do get out and do your thing. Because my best friend wanted to be put into the duck lagoon down at Lake Michigan. But, that was just too risky. There was too many people around that could see things. So that's why he ended up at the cathedral church. So,
I actually did that for my mother. My dad and my mom, they had plots already paid for because my dad was in the military. And they had at Arniestown, New Jersey, they were going to be cremated, and the urns were put in the ground in Arniestown. But my mother had told me she wanted to be buried with her father and mother up in Troop, Pennsylvania. So what I did is I talked to the funeral director in New Jersey at the time, and he said, what I can do for you is we'll take the urn with most of the ashes, put it in Arniestown, but I've got a little heart, and we'll put some of the ashes in the ceramic heart, and you can take that up. And my brother and I, we drove up to Troop, Pennsylvania, and up into the country. And it was in the wintertime, we brought shovels up there, and we just dug like a foot down where the flower bed was in front of the stones. And I think I actually hurt my back because the ground was frozen doing it, and put the heart in the ground and covered it up. And as we were driving away, this gentleman comes running at us from across the street. So I just waved, and as we drove by.
Yeah. Well, it's, like my biological mother is buried down in Arkansas, in Bates, outside of Batesville, and Bethesda. And, I was surprised because we didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to contact the coroner or anybody. We just dug a hole and put her ashes in, and, I did the burial office, and we were all fine. But boy, that don't happen here. In fact, it's very, committals are terrible, especially at the military cemeteries. You have 15 minutes to do the committal service. And I just do not like to go to military cemetery. I try to get my way out of it because I cannot stand the officious, women who seem to be running those things. So, but that's an interesting whole situation, burials next. And one of the things too we need to do is, as Jay was mentioning, we need to perhaps make indication of things we know we've been told but aren't down in writing.
Yeah.
I went with my grandmother down to the Reynolds graves in Galatia, New York. And Nathaniel Reynolds worked at the mill, and he met an unfortunate end. He was down in the sluiceway cleaning it out, and a fire got started up on the next floor, and they didn't know he was in the sluiceway. And so they pushed everything down into the sluiceway, and they saw his body come out of the sluiceway, and they realized, oh my gosh, so while we were standing there doing that, my grandmother walks over, and with her cane, she pounds on the ground, and she says, I had another sister. She's buried here. We think that the doctor screwed up when he delivered her, but she died right after birth. There's no stone, no nothing. The only way I know that is there is because she told me. And that's something, you document these kind of things, because those are memories that are forever gone. And, there's no record anywhere of that daughter because it was in between the census, and nobody, it was an issue that no one wanted to talk about, And I really find that interesting. There's a stone that has a name on it. It's on the other side of the roadway. It's another branch of the family. And she told me, she said, nope, that person isn't buried there. That stone was sold to to another family. That's who's buried there. She herself is buried over in Iberville and got a stone there. And so here would be the problem. Somebody researching would find a stone in Iberville and a stone in Wallachia, and they'd wonder, well, what the devil is this noise, But again, it's because, she told me this, we have information about that, and we've documented it in writing. And there's a lot of stuff out there we can document and, tell a story about. So
Maybe we should, as a topic for another meeting, have everyone bring the one question that they would ask of a particular ancestor if they had the chance. Only one question and one ancestor. I think I'd have to sit and think about that one for a while.
Yeah.
And is it G-rated or?
Yeah.
Lieutenant Richard, who the devil was your father?
Yeah.
No, I come across those questions a lot, and I'll sort of write them down and hope that I come across answers. But, Tad, you were talking about, those sort of tidbits of information that don't seem to make it into, there were no birth certificates and things like that. One of the places that at least I've been able to find some of my family information, and then I can read a lot of other sources, is it comes from, so Summers County, West Virginia is where my mom's family is from. And they wrote a book. They have had 2 books that have gone out about the history of Summers County. And they also did a cemetery book. And the cemetery book was done in I would say the 40s. So you talked about those family cemeteries, which I know a lot of them have sort of disappeared, but they covered them in the book, which I thought was a nice way. And they will say there were a number of people buried here, but did not have stones. They tried very hard to capture all of those sort of little pieces of family history that didn't necessarily make it into any other type of, record, if you will. And I found that that's been incredibly helpful. But again, it's a very, very small county in West Virginia, and they pretty much were all related to one another. So, collectively, they were writing this material. I'm sure some of it's false. This was what was assumed or known to the community, not necessarily based on fact. But I do think that where we should be also noting down sort of what was the local legend, what were we told X, Y, and Z, because that may be the only information that's going to be garnered on that topic. So
those county histories can be so wonderful. And Mabel was a lifelong Temperance League member, never touched a drop of those alcoholic beverages. And you just sort of sit there, okay, we'll buy that one, maybe just for medicinal purposes,
Something I should check into, the part of Tennessee where I'm from, East Tennessee, was part of the whole TVA series of dams that came through in the New Deal. And I know there's one area where I'm from that there was a town called Race Springs, and it was going to be flooded when they built the dam, the Watts Bar Dam there. And there was a cemetery there, and I had family members in that. And it was a WPA project to exhume those bodies and relocate them, but they also kept all of those records. And I don't know if that WPA project was only because of that, or whether there were other WPA cemetery transcription projects. I mean, they were obviously in that time looking for ways to give people employment. And I'm going to check into that and see if that was just something unique because of the dam situation, or if they did that for other cemeteries, because that some of that information is so much closer to the source and those people have been relocated or whatever, but that could be an area of information that we're not tapping into if it exists. But I'll check
Right.
that.
Ken,
Mm-hmm.
I can comment on that. I've got an ancestor, not a Park line, but an ancestor who was a former minister around the present day Mooresville, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was a pastor, perhaps he was given special treatment, but I doubt it. I would think that they all were disinterred, because I believe it's the Catawba River that was flooded for the TVA project in that area. And they were all removed, as I remember, to the eastern bank. I happened to be in the hospital because I had an injury there, right next door to this hospital. And so I suspect, and I know my ancestors there, I found the tombstone, but I suspect a lot of the church members are also disinterred and removed and reburied.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to comment about something else that I've heard. I'm a newbie here, but
Hardly a newbie. You've been a member here longer than most of us.
well, that may be, but I'm new to this type of conference. I love it, actually. We do Zoom and other forums too. But I'd like to comment about the area of burials, and there is a military aspect that we're perhaps kind of skirting and not involving ourselves in. But because I'm a son of a Union veteran, actually several, the memorials that we do every Memorial Day as a present group of Sons of Union veterans harken back to the Memorial Day that was announced at the end of the Civil War. Because if it hadn't been for the Civil War, we probably wouldn't have Memorial Day. And so we are there to remember, and we have a very scripted way of handling this, such that from state to state, camp to camp, there should be something very similar. And we call it walking the marble orchards, and making sure that we are accounting for everyone. And if there's been damage in the past year, such as some of the rains that we've had, these, what do they call them, atmospheric rivers, there's been a lot of damage occur in areas. And so we're responsible for that. But we are also responsible for picking up the gauntlet left to us by the actual soldiers, the veterans of the Civil War. And first there was the Sons of Veterans, and now there's the Sons of Union Veterans, because we are oftentimes grandsons and great-grandsons of the Civil War veterans. And we honor both the North and the South, although there's two separate groups. And we actually, and as to Tad's point earlier, when a gravestone sinks into the ground, that's not acceptable. We have a apparatus where we can wrap the gravestone in heavy rope and pull that up, bring it up, use a new pediment, set it down, straighten it up, clean it up, and we'll have a little ceremony after that.
Hey, Doug, do you know anything about the Grand Army of the Republic markers that are on stones? My third great grandfather has a marker on his stone, but he died in 1850, so he was never in the Civil War. And I'm wondering what the relationship might be, if you have any idea.
So the Grand Army of the Republic are the actual veterans who served during the war, 1861 to 1865. So if your ancestor died in 1850, he may be buried in the same spot where his gravestone has been moved, and two people are buried there. I would be very interested in the details of that.
Yeah.
So, you've mentioned about military cemeteries, but like I have a Revolutionary War veteran who's buried in a private cemetery, a church cemetery up in New York. And the graveyards are really sort of at the mercy of the church or the community that they're affiliated with. Do you all, are there organizations out there that are taking care of military stones, even in private cemeteries?
Oh, A lot of them are private. In fact, most of them are private in Michigan here. And we go all the way up to the Upper Peninsula. We have Sons of Union Veterans Camps. A camp is a local organization. The department is the organization of camps in a state. And there's the national organization that combines all the departments. In fact, last weekend, the reason why I couldn't join you last weekend, which would have been my first try, was we had our department encampment, which were all the camps from Michigan gathered together once a year. And to your point specifically, I would try to find out something about which state are you in?
Well, I'm in Pennsylvania. This was in Newburgh, New York.
New York. Okay. Then with regard to New York, I would try to find out where you might have Sons of Union Veterans camps. And if that's not easy to find, I could find out from the New York Department of Sons of Union Veterans where the closest camp would be to the area you're discussing.
So is this for any US war or just for?
We honor the Civil War veterans.
Okay.
You know,
And like the Field of Flanders in Europe, and all those are lined up just perfectly. They're cared for. Unfortunately, we don't have enough people to make it that nice, but we try to do our darn best to make sure that those markers are there. And if necessary, we will get a marker. We can order it from the Veterans Administration. We can replace veteran stones. And in fact, there were a number of Black soldiers we had found in Charlotte, Michigan, that trees had grown up around. And so we simply had to work with the local veterans as well. And we had them taken to a Custer National Cemetery, Battle Creek, and buried them. And then we had formal ceremonies for that. So we do all we can to honor the veterans.
on a side note, and tying it into the Parks line, I don't know if any of you might remember, it was about the time that President Obama had been elected. I wrote an article for the newsletter, and I could probably send it out as a mailing again, about James Parks, who dug some of the first graves at Arlington. He had been born a slave on Arlington Plantation, which of course was owned by Robert E. Lee and it really belonged to his wife, who was a descendant of George Washington and Martha Washington, and it was the Parke Custis line. And I think that's probably why they adopted the name Parks. And he was a second or third generation slave in that family. And after the war ended, he stayed on as a grave digger at Arlington for many years until he retired. And when he died in the 20s, I think it was, he is the only, I think, civilian of that type who was allowed to be buried in Arlington by a special order of the Secretary of War. I think at that time they still had a Secretary of War at the time, because he was born there and spent his entire life and career as a grave digger at Arlington. And there are reminiscences in there of what it was like, when it was back before the war and all that. So I'll just throw something out on the mailing list on that, and in case anybody wants to read that again. But I thought it was interesting that we had a Parks connection to Arlington, so, and the timing of it was, I think I wrapped it up because it was at the time when Obama had just become president, of what James Parks would have thought, being the slave of a descendant of George Washington. And if he could stand, and because you can see Arlington from DC, from the White House, and knowing that there was a Black man in the White House. Sort of the river of history, how it flows.
Good stuff.
Is it Doug? The other J Park song?
Yeah, Doug.
No, what you're in Michigan?
Yes, he's up near Lansing.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So because I'm in Michigan, I'm from Ann Arbor, but I moved to Detroit and lived in it, but I'm in Michigan as well. So thought it was kind of close to home.
Super. So I heard you mention you're having a reunion in Michigan sometime?
No, I think he said it was going to be in Jackson, Mississippi this year.
Oh, okay.
Here.
I think that was a few years off.
Yeah, but-
Yeah, it's gonna be in Mississippi, but ours is gonna be when we come back together and decide. I think we're like third on the list, so it'll be Florida, Texas, and then to Michigan.
Okay,
And that
like
was-
3 years.
Yeah, well, it'll be probably like 6 because we do every 2 years.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Ken, do we have a project going, or was there a project? We were doing service, military service, trying to do a collection of all of the parks who served in the various different
The only thing I can think of is I've abstracted all of the Revolutionary War pension files for parks, and where I could identify them done so. And that's another thing we're trying to get on the website, if we can get our web people in gear. Let's not go down that road right now.
Ken, do you know when the pension, there were certain pension files I understand that were lost in a fire? I think
Oh.
1800 and 1806 or something like that.
Well, I don't know. There are 1812 pensions files available in the archives. I've held some of them. And there are records of pensions from earlier Indian wars and things that exist. I don't know if the actual papers still exist, but the information's out there.
Yeah.
But 1812, the Mexican War, I've also looked at some of those. And then, of course, tons of Civil War files.
I think the ones I'm referring to are Revolutionary War records. Because if the fire was in 1800, it would have been.
Well,
Revolutionary.
as far as I know, they're still extant. And maybe some of them were lost. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that's checked with is some of these patron organizations, like the Founders and Patriots of America, who have a founder that was here before 1657, and in that same male line, they had a revolutionary veteran, the Sons of the Colonial Wars, Sons of the American Revolution, and there's another one, there's another organization with a similar name. And I just read something recently. They had just finished digitizing some group, and I thought it was 1812 records they had just gotten, digitized. So
Yeah.
it might be interesting to check on some of these patronal organizations because they find things that they can do and be useful to history and that. But just query the site and look to the secretary of the society and see if they can tell you what they have or have not done. I know I saw something recently about the 1812 records.
Well, there was a project. I think we talked about that last time. Maybe Judy Russell was very active in it. I know at one conference they were passing the hat, literally raising money to fund the digitizing of the 1812 pension files.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been finished. I think.
I believe so too.
But if anybody's ever looked at any of those files, you know what a big task that is, because some of those files have a good number of paper in them, and it all has to be handled, and some of it's fairly delicate. I remember holding and looking at and I couldn't believe they allowed it, but looking at a file from the Mexican War. So that was 1840s. And there was a bundle of handwritten letters that had been sewn together with a ribbon. And they actually allowed me to undo the ribbon and take them so that I could photocopy each one. But and some of those Civil War files can go in, especially if it's a widow's pension file and there's a lot of correspondence back and forth and they need more information, and they can just go on and on. I've got one that's, that thick, and a lot of it is not genealogically significant, but you just feel somehow that if you're there and you're copying it, you might as well go all the way, because you'll never be back to do that.
It's amazing what was really great back in the 20th century was the fact that you had documents that trace the ownership of land, and the name just went away from me. You know what I mean?
Bureau of Land Management?
No. When property is being sold, they'd have to go search the records. You know what they, Susan?
Title
Survey? Survey?
Yeah, no.
No, a title search. That's when you buy a house now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but back in those days, the property we owned over on the west side of the city, we have the actual title document, that traces it all the way back to when the lands were taken from the Indians and all on and so forth. And what's interesting is sometimes there's little tidbits in there that, somebody had a messy marriage or there was a second woman involved, and that would be in there. And one of the funny things was when that section was developed, it was a non-alcoholic area. You couldn't consume, sell, or make alcoholic beverages. And, and that was in the deed, and that just floated down. Nobody pays attention to that little piece of information, but it's still in the deed. When we sold the place, that still was in the deed. And we said, well, can we get that removed? And they said, that's a little bit of a problem. Don't worry about it, kind of thing. But those title searches, if you find one, the property was owned by the family, I don't know what happens to them. I think they get lost in the process. But again, that's another one of those documents that might have information that really would kind of be interesting to know. It was kind of interesting to know, he was a tinker, but he had a woman on his side. And, and it's just like, who would have known, so.
The thing about the dry area, no producing, drinking, I just saw this again on Facebook, a posting of some gangster during Prohibition. I can't remember what his name was, but he bet people that within 30 minutes, he could come into any town and get a drink in 30 minutes or less. And apparently, St. Louis, it took him, 22 minutes, and Chicago, 10 minutes. And then New Orleans, he got in the cab and asked the cab driver, and the cab driver handed him a drink. So they got the record.
There's a wonderful book out. It's not a Park relation. The book is called Dirty Helen. And Dirty Helen was a character in two halves. She had a half a dozen husbands. She ran a bar down on Claiborne Street, 20th and Claiborne. And she had, and all the big names, the stars and that, who came to town, they would wander over to Dirty Helen's because they could get liquor there. And, the city was on the take on that one. The police department was on the take on that. But it's a beautiful book about things that happen that, it's a shame that, more people don't know about these things. A couple of years ago, they actually had a celebration of her birthday. And they actually had some liquor that was the stuff that she had been selling with her name on it, so.
Tad, I just thought of another, I think it's military organization, Society of the Cincinnati.
Yes. And they, I think that's limited to, I think it's 137 members, his primogeniture. A fellow I know very well, Thomas Pelham Curtis III, his brother was eligible for being in Cincinnati, but his brother wasn't interested, so he gave his right to Thomas. And so that's, but that's another interesting organization, And they hold very tightly to their, their tradition. So, all right.
Well, we probably are digressing, but if anybody has anything else, otherwise maybe we should think about wrapping it up for this month. But I'll look into some of these things and shoot some things out on email, and we'll look into this the volunteer projects, especially the My Heritage family trees. That sounds like something that's very doable, and if there's enough interest, we can line up some people for that. But, and as always, if anybody has ideas for something to talk about next month, don't be shy, just shoot us an email.
That will be the 13th of May, Saturday, the 13th of May. So, all right.
Okay, folks. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Good to see
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Good spring,
Bye.
good Easter, all that stuff. Take care.
Everyone, take care.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.